Chainsaw Man is a manga that I'm sure you've heard of by now if you're in the manga community and follow that kind of stuff. It's a great manga, and even if you're not a fan of manga and only watch anime, you'll still be hearing about it soon, because it has an anime adaptation coming by Mappa who I know is going to do a really good job. If you want to get into Chainsaw Man, now is a better time than ever, because part 1 of Chainsaw Man just ended in December, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen in part 2. Everywhere I checked for part 2's release date said it was coming January 2021, but we're currently in March and I haven't been able to find part 2 anywhere, so I guess there's still some time left to catch up before part 2 starts. So if you want to know if this is a manga that you might like, I definitely recommend continuing this video, because I'm going to be staying as spoiler free as I can and only getting into very minor spoilers in this video, so yeah, let's get into it. Chainsaw Man is a Shonen Jump manga that I think differentiates itself from other shonen a lot. It's like one of those shonen series that really doesn't feel like shonen, at least not to me, kind of like how Attack on Titan is. Chainsaw Man has a lot of swearing, violence, and gore, which is definitely toned down a lot in other shonen, as well as some much darker themes than your average shonen manga, and to me it felt like a breath of fresh air, and a lot more unique compared to other shonens that I've seen. To quickly sum up Chainsaw Man's premise, it's basically about this kid named Denji, who's been working fighting demons to help him pay off his father's debt to the Yakuza, and he can barely even afford to eat a lot of the time. He lives with this chainsaw dog devil that he befriended named Pochita, and one day Denji ends up getting set up by the mafia and he gets killed. The chainsaw dog decides to make a deal with Denji where he'll be Denji's heart and let Denji use his chainsaw power and live, and in return he gets to see Denji's dreams. And with this, Chainsaw Man was born. Denji fights off the Yakuza and then is found by a girl named Makima who offers him a job as a demon hunter, but this time he'll actually get paid and get to live the normal life he's always wanted to live. At least it's normal other than the demon hunter part, obviously. But he can finally live in a normal house, eat good food, and start to make relationships. This is what Denji always wanted, so he accepts. And the rest of the story follows Denji and his teammates on demon hunting missions, and stuff like that. The premise isn't really anything crazy, but I think it really works for Chainsaw Man's story. So now that I got that summary over with, let me get into what I liked and disliked about this manga. First I want to talk about Denji, because his character is honestly probably my favorite thing about this manga. Denji is another one of the reasons why Chainsaw Man feels a lot different from your regular shonen to me. Denji is very different from your average Shonen Jump protagonist, both in terms of his personality and motivation. Denji is someone who spent all of his life up to this point living alone with his dog fighting demons, and that dictates his entire personality in the character that he is. Denji never went to school, so he is kind of dumb, but that doesn't really make him feel like your generic dumb character. In fact, he can actually be pretty smart at times, especially later in the manga. Since Denji only really ever had one friend that was a chainsaw dog, he doesn't really know how he's supposed to act around people, which makes Denji feel very interesting. Denji is someone who's very unfiltered and not afraid to say anything to anyone, which can lead to some very interesting interactions. His morals are also very different from other shonen protagonists, which I think is shown very well in this moment, where he gets a car thrown at him with someone in the driver's seat, he catches it and just throws it back with the man still in the car. Any other protagonist obviously would have tried to save the man, but it seems like Denji really doesn't care. I really like this different take on a protagonist, and I think Denji's personality is really good, and we get to see how he changes throughout the story. As I said earlier, Denji is also very different in terms of his motivation. Denji doesn't really have a set motivation throughout this manga, and it's constantly changing as it goes on. Denji's real motivation is to find motivation, to find a purpose and a goal that he could work towards. Before, his purpose was just to survive, and everything that he did was to help him stay alive. When he was constantly hungry working for food, he didn't have time to think of another motivation other than survival. Then he's suddenly given this opportunity to live a normal life. Now Denji has to decide what he's working towards, and we see him try to figure it out throughout the course of this manga. First, he thinks that his purpose is to touch breasts. I know it sounds funny, but he's really serious about it. But when he finally reaches that goal, he realizes that it's not really anything special. We see Denji have experiences like this and learn and grow from them, and by chapter 97, he feels like a very different person than he was in chapter 1. Since I can't really talk about spoilers, I can't really go into any more detail about Denji, but he's definitely my favorite character and probably my favorite thing about this manga. Next, I want to talk about the side characters, which I really liked for the most part. First, we have the other two characters in the main trio, Power and Aki. These were easily my favorite characters other than Denji, and both do change throughout the story. At first, Denji, Power, and Aki all kind of hated each other, but as the story goes on, we get to see their relationships develop, and I really like the dynamic between the three of them. At the beginning, I thought that Aki was a decent character, but I never imagined that I liked him as much as I did by the end of the manga, and the same goes for Power, who I originally thought was nothing more than a comic relief character. Luckily, as I said, I was wrong about both, and I love how they changed and how their relationships grew through the course of this manga. Now I want to talk about the rest of the side characters who I have mixed opinions on. Something that I noticed as I read this manga is that the author is not afraid to kill off his characters, and sometimes that can be good for the story, but a lot of the time it can end up negatively affecting the manga. A lot of the time the characters who ended up dying were in the manga for the perfect amount of time and I have no complaints about, while some of the others feel like they were killed off way too early, when it definitely could have benefited from keeping them alive a bit longer, so we could have learned more about them. This kinda sucks a bit because some of the characters in the story actually felt like they could have been very interesting but felt very underutilized in the story. I obviously can't really give any examples here because I can't go around telling you who dies, but if you read the manga, I'm sure you'll be able to understand what I mean. A positive thing I can say about these characters though is that none of the side characters ever feel like they outshine Denji, which is a problem I see in many other shonen. An easy example of this is My Hero Academia, where in my opinion it feels like Deku was easily outshined by characters like Mirio, and honestly I find most of the characters much more interesting than him. So yeah, my opinion on the Chainsaw Man side characters is kind of mixed, but for the most part I think that they're pretty good. Next I want to talk about the villains in this story, which like the side characters I have mixed opinions on. Normally what I look for in a villain is someone I can understand but also want to see beaten by the main character, but I feel like a lot of the time Chainsaw Man doesn't really deliver in that aspect. The majority of the villains in this story are decent as villains, but they aren't really memorable to me other than their fights. We don't get to learn much about most of the villains, and because of that we can't really understand their actions at all. These characters can still make you want to see Denji beat them up, and they do work as villains, but I can't really give them any more praise than that. But as I said, that's for the majority of the villains. There are actually two villains that I really like in this story. To avoid giving away their identities, I'm just going to say the Bomb Devil and the main villain. For the Bomb Devil, I really liked their character, and we got to spend a lot more time with them than the other villains. And for the main villain, I can't really get into that in this video because of spoilers obviously, so yeah, just like the side characters, giving us a bit more time to learn about these villains would make them much better and much more memorable in my opinion, but they still do work for the story and aren't necessarily bad. Next I want to talk about the art in this manga, which I have nothing but positive things to say about. Chainsaw Man has art that I'd say is pretty unique compared to the other manga that I've read, because it has this kind of messy and gritty look to it which I think really fits the story. The art is overall just very good, and honestly I don't have much to say about it, but I think it's very good at conveying emotions through facial expressions, and looks really great in the action scenes, which brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, the fights. Since this is a shonen, I obviously have to talk about the fights, which are all great in my opinion. In this manga, we see lots of really cool and well-drawn fights with lots of blood, and I really like them, but every time I bring up fights, I always mention that I love to see strategy, and it's probably my favorite thing to see in fights, which is why I prefer fights in shows like Naruto and Hunter x Hunter over something like One Piece. Well, for the first bit of this manga, the fights just consist of Denji ripping people apart with a chainsaw, which I honestly have no complaints with, but as we get farther into the manga, there is more strategy and thinking involved in the fights than just ripping people apart, which I really liked. It's not like there were some 500 IQ Death Note big brain plans or anything, but it made the fights a lot more entertaining to me, and it also helps the fights feel a lot more different from each other. Also, I just love seeing Denji find different ways to use his chainsaw powers, which is really cool. Also, even though Denji is basically immortal, I feel like this manga is often still able to make it feel like there's a lot at stake during the fights, whether it be the lives of the side characters, the civilians, or even sometimes Denji's life actually is at stake. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about the fights. Another aspect that I wanted to mention quickly that I think goes very unappreciated is the comedy in Chainsaw Man, because honestly it can be pretty funny at times. Normally I don't really find anime and manga funny, especially if they aren't supposed to be a comedy, but Chainsaw Man was honestly able to get a few laughs out of me and I really liked the comedy in it. Now lastly, I quickly want to mention my opinion on the ending, still saying spoiler free by the way. Even though this manga isn't over yet and we're getting a part 2, I think that its conclusion to the first part was really great and it really fit the story. It tied everything up in a way that felt really satisfying to me, and I was really hooked for those last 25 or so chapters. The only real issues I have with the ending are that it still feels like there are a few unanswered questions and the main villain wasn't really given a backstory, but who knows, these problems still might be resolved in part 2, and I really can't wait to see where they go with the story from here on. So yeah, honestly Chainsaw Man was really great and I regret not reading it earlier. When the anime comes out, I really hope that it gets just as popular as Jujutsu Kaisen did, because honestly it deserves it, and I'd really recommend reading this or giving it a watch when the anime comes out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my video, and if you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, because we're getting extremely close to 100 subs right now, and I'm sure you don't want to miss any of my future uploads, because I am too insane with this godly I can't even if I tried, but anyway, yeah, I hope that you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.